Hi guys, this is my series on American history and it'll cover from the Revolution to the Civil War and maybe even further in the future. This is episode 3 and we'll be talking about the Stamp Act and the Boston Massacre. I'd like to start this video by saying if you notice any factual errors within the video or if I've said anything that is incorrect, please comment it and let me know. I'll make sure to correct it in a pinned comment or in the description. This video will be split into two sections. The first will be on the taxes introduced and the second on how it caused the Boston Massacre and other outcomes. Part 1. Victory in the French and Indian War was costly for the British government. They also believed that the colonists had benefited greatly, but were not paying a fair share in taxes. Therefore, in March of 1765, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act, which was designed to pay for 10,000 new British troops in the colonies. This placed a tax on documents, including legal contacts, newspapers, and even playing cards. The amount taxed was 1.5 shillings, or up to £10, depending on the document. This was paid in British sterling rather than colonial currency, and anyone in violation of the Stamp Act would be tried in Vice Admiralty courts, which had no jury. The Stamp Act greatly angered the colonists, who protested strongly against its introduction. In October of 1765, the Stamp Act Congress was held in New York, and it included 27 delegates from 9 colonies. They then published the Declarations of Rights, which argued that only the colonial government could raise taxes in America. Since colonists didn't have a vote in British Parliament and colonial government had not been consulted on the stamp tax, therefore colonists were being taxed without consent. Protests broke out in various American cities, including Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. Stamp distributors were facing violent threats, so most had resigned their positions by 1766. Ultimately, these protests resulted in the repeal of the Stamp Act in 1766. However, the issue of taxation continued to cause resentment within the colonies. Part 2. Although the Stamp Act had been repealed, the British were determined to raise more revenue from the colonies. In 1767, the Townshend Acts imposed import taxes on porcelain glass, paper, lead, and tea. These were essential commodities colonists were unable to source or produce themselves. The revenue would pay salaries of colonial governors and judges, ensuring loyalty to Britain. The colonists responded to these taxes by organizing boycotts of British goods and harassing tax commissioners. In 1768, to quell the resistance, British troops occupied Boston. These troops became increasingly unwelcome and caused tension within Boston. On the 5th of March 1770, a British sentry struck a 13-year-old apprentice wigmaker, Edward Garrick, in the face with his musket. A crowd of 50 Bostonians attacked the soldier, throwing objects and threatening him. A British commander then sent 7 soldiers to assist the soldier. These soldiers were also attacked by the mob, which had now grown to a size of 300 to 400 people. The soldiers then fired into the crowd, killing 3 and wounding 8, of whom 2 died later. Differing accounts of the incident were later published in anonymous pamphlets. Anti-British publications suggested that it was a massacre and that it was an unprovoked attack against peaceful protesters, and they argued that there was evidence that this was evidence that the British government was oppressing colonists. One anti-British source claimed that there was not the least provocation and that the troops began to form into a half circle and began to fire upon the people. However, pro-British publications claimed that soldiers were attacked by disloyal colonists. One pro-British source claimed that the inhabitants had formed and were preparing to execute execute a design of attacking the soldiers on that evening. Later in 1770, the Townshend tax were repealed except for the import duty on tea, since tea was the most lucrative tax because colonists drank nearly 1.2 million pounds of tea each year. In protest, the colonists boycotted tea sold by the British East India Company and smuggled in Dutch tea. In May 1773, the Tea Act was passed to allow the British East India Company to sell tea to the colonists tax-free. This made the East India Company tea much cheaper, which led to a boost in sales and an increase in company revenue. However, tea importers paid a tax when it reached colonial ports. This created a monopoly, banning other tea companies from selling to the American colonies. Even though the Tea Act made tea cheaper in some colonies. Some colonists protested. In December 16 of 1773, three East India Company ships arrived in Boston Harbor. A large group of colonists refused to allow the tea to be unloaded on the night of December. Unloaded. On the night of December 16, the Sons of Liberty boarded the ships and threw 342 chests holding 45 tons worth of tea, over $1 million, into the sea. Many colonists celebrated this event, which became known as the Boston Tea Party, as a blow against a tyrannical government. However, other colonists disapproved of the destruction of property. The British government was furious and saw this as an act of rebellion against the crown. Conclusion. In summary, the British needed to pay debt caused by the French and Indian War and looked to American colonies to provide them with revenue. The British then introduced a series of taxes through the Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, and Tea Acts, which the colonists resented. The colonists believed that the taxes were unfair and undermined their rights. By the 1770s, tensions between the colonists and governments were reaching a boiling point, and some colonists were beginning to defy the British government.